School days, good old golden rule days.
Today, school days are so much a part of American life that it is difficult to realize that only a little over 150 years ago, most Americans were unable to get any schooling at all. It was the exceptional person who could read and write. Thomas Jefferson expressed a very radical idea in 1800 when he wrote,
"Educate and inform the whole mass of the people."
At that time, only the wealthy were educated. It took many years for our present system of free public education to develop in the United States. Yet the seeds for public education were planted back in the New England colonies where the Puritans had settled. The matter of schooling received early attention here because the Puritans considered the ability to read the Bible basic for salvation. As a result, on April 14, 1642, the Massachusetts Bay Colony passed the first law dealing with public education in the American colonies. It provided only for teaching children to read.
"We do hereby order that in every town men appointed shall have the power to take account of all parents and masters and of their children, of their ability to read and understand the principles of religion, and to impose fines upon such as shall refuse."
5 years later, in 1647, Massachusetts passed a law setting up the first system of public school education in the colonies. The Puritans were afraid that the knowledge of their English ancestors would die in the American wilderness unless it was taught to their children. And once again, in this law, they were battling the devil, ye old deluder Satan, by requiring that the Scriptures be taught.
"It being one chief project of ye old deluder Satan, to keep men from the knowledge of ye Scriptures, and that learning might not be buried in the grave of our fathers in church and the commonwealth, it is ordered that every township of 50 householders shall appoint one to teach all children to write and read, whose wages shall be paid either by the parents or by the inhabitants in general. It is further ordered that where any town shall increase to 100 families, they shall set up a grammar school to instruct youth fitted for the university."
This Massachusetts law established the important principle that the state would require and the community should provide schools for its children. With the exception of Rhode Island, the other New England colonies adopted the same system. By 1765, at least 48 Massachusetts towns were maintaining grammar schools where basic subjects were taught with rigid discipline.
Reading and writing and arithmetic,
Taught to the tune of a hickory stick.
Elsewhere in the colonies, there were few public schools. In the middle colonies, where there were many different religious sects, each church supported its own school. And in the southern colonies, where the plantations were widely scattered, the children of the planters were either tutored at home or sent to England to school. Throughout the colonies, the leading method of education for the poor was apprenticeship, under which a person was legally bound to serve another in return for being taught a trade or skill, such as weaving.
"When I was a young lad, I lived all alone. I worked at the weaver's trade."
A handful of colleges, such as Harvard, Yale, and William and Mary, were established primarily for the purpose of training ministers. But few young people got to college, and many received no schooling at all. Then, in 1775, the American Revolution started.
Scholars leave their schools with patriotic teachers. Farmers seize their tools, headed by their preachers.
After the colonies had won their independence from England, one of the many problems the new nation faced was education. Because religious liberty was a freedom for which Americans had fought, the new state constitutions repealed laws which required the state government to support the established church. Thus, the old educational system, under the churches, was undermined, and there was no new system to take its place. But the founders of the United States realized the necessity of education in a democracy ruled by the people. Benjamin Franklin said,
"Wise and good men are the strength of a state, much more so than riches or arms."
As the new nation expanded westward, American leaders knew they must plan for general education. Thus, when the Confederation Congress drew up the Land Ordinance of 1785, it reserved certain areas in the Northwest Territory for educational purposes, as follows.
Be it ordained by the United States and Congress assembled to divide the said territory into townships of 6 miles square. There shall be reserved the lot number 16 of every township for the maintenance of public schools within the said township.
Thus, the principle of national support for education was established. 2 years later, this principle was reaffirmed in a provision of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which stated,
Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged.
At first, there was not much interest in education along the frontier. The settlers were too busy conquering the wilderness and trying to survive the hardships of frontier life. Education mainly consisted of the 3 R's, and the switch was used freely to discipline the students. But gradually, more and more one-room schoolhouses were built on western townships.
It was there I learned reading and writing, in the little one-room school, and 'twas there I learned howling and fighting, from my schoolmaster, Mr. O'Toole.
And along the eastern coast, people who were not wealthy began to argue for more educational opportunities for their children.
Why should only the rich children be educated? This is a democracy, and we people are supposed to rule.
Yeah, and if we can't get better education for our children, only the rich will rule. I think the state ought to set up good schools here, just like in the West. How about that? I believe. All right.
Opposition to public education came mainly from the owners of private schools, religious groups who maintained their own schools, wealthy people, and others who argued,
It's unconstitutional for the state to levy taxes to support schools.
Yes, the education of children is the responsibility of the parents, not of the state. That's true. I say yes, the state.
In spite of some opposition, the principle of a free public school system, supported by the state, was gradually accepted by a majority of the states. In 1803, higher education was given a great boost when Congress granted to the new state of Ohio an entire township of land to support a university. Similar grants were made to each new state entering the Union, with the result that 17 state universities had been founded by 1861, when the country was plunged into a civil war.
In 1861, hurrah, hurrah, that was when the war begun, hurrah, hurrah.
Even during the Civil War, public education was given a powerful stimulus. On July 2nd, 1862, Congress enacted what is considered one of the most important pieces of legislation ever passed by the government on behalf of education, the Morrill Act. This act granted land to each state loyal to the Union. Section 4 of the Morrill Act states the purpose for which this land was to be used.
The endowment, support, and maintenance of at least one college where the leading subject shall be, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanical arts.
The Morrill Act laid upon the states the obligation to support a program of higher education. The intent of the law was to place a college course within the reach of everyone who wanted it. State after state revised its educational system in order to meet the terms of the act. Many states used their grant to develop one large university of agriculture and engineering.
On, Wisconsin, plunge right through that line.
On, Iowa, proudly at the fore. On, Iowa, on forevermore.
Minnesota, hats off to thee.
Hail to the victors valiant, hail to the conquering heroes, hail, hail to Michigan, the champions of the West.
Other states set up several smaller colleges. Eventually, 69 land-grant colleges profited from the terms of the Morrill Act. In 1867, the national government created the Office of the United States Commissioner of Education, whose job it was to
collect facts concerning education in the several states and territories, and to diffuse information respecting school systems and the methods of teaching.
Although the first public high school was established in Massachusetts in 1821, it was not until after the Civil War that the movement for public high schools grew stronger across the country. Before this, private academies had generally carried forward the education of those going on to college. When the Civil War broke out, there were only about 100 public high schools in the whole country. But by 1879, there were 500. And by the end of the century, 6,000. Then, in the 1900s, the United States underwent tremendous growth due to what is called the Industrial Revolution. The great increase in wealth resulting from this revolution made more tax money available for the support of public education. And as more and more children pushed on into public high schools, these schools began to offer courses designed for purposes other than preparation for college. Courses of study now included such subjects as industrial arts, home economics, and shop, thanks to the Smith-Hughes Act, passed in 1917.
This act provided for federal grants and aid to be matched by the contributions of individual states for promoting instruction in agriculture and the trades. Under this act, schools could receive federal funds to pay the salaries of teachers qualified to teach agriculture, manual training, cooking, sewing, and other practical subjects. It also established a federal board for vocational education. Plumbers, founders, dyers,
Farmers, hatters, tailors,
gaugers, sealers, wares, carpenters, and sailors.
Then, on June 22, 1944, higher education was made possible for many more when Congress passed the GI Bill of Rights.
This bill provided educational benefits to discharged veterans of World War II, including tuition fees, school supplies, and an allowance for living expenses.
Thousands of veterans went back to school under these terms, and college enrollments rose to startling figures.
Similar educational payments were provided for veterans of the Korean War in 1952. Many believe that the expenditures made in behalf of education through these two GI bills eventually will prove to be one of America's soundest investments.
The federal government, although not basically responsible for education, continues to support it in many ways. On September 2, 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act.
This act included provisions for student loans and fellowships. It also provided grants to states on a matching fund basis for their public schools to increase education in science, mathematics, and foreign languages, and for technical job training.
American schools continue to expand and change to meet the needs of a growing democracy. The free public education system of the United States is unique in the world. It is a prime characteristic of our society and has even been called the American religion. Thus, Americans are living up to the words of Thomas Jefferson, who in 1818 wrote of his vision for
a system of general instruction which shall reach every description of our citizens, from the richest to the poorest. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for free freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining